Part 1, Unit 1. The language of the press. A news report.
Blaze at charity bonfire damages warehouses. 2 firemen were overcome by fumes and several bystanders slightly injured in a fire last night at Paxton, Kent. The blaze was caused when flames from a Guy Fawkes night bonfire, organised in support of local charities, spread to nearby warehouses. Firemen battled against the flames for several hours before getting them under control, and at one time there were 10 fire engines in attendance at the blaze, the largest in this part of Kent for more than 5 years. Strong winds hampered operations, and at first there were fears that showers of sparks might reach other warehouses some distance away, one of which, a paint store, could have exploded. But firemen succeeded in confining the outbreak to warehouses containing less inflammable materials. The injured were allowed home after treatment at the local hospital, but one of the firemen was detained for observation. Early this morning a dense pall of smoke hung over the warehouses, while firemen continued to damp down the still smouldering debris. Damage. According to the owner of the warehouses, local builder's merchant Mr. Arthur Peel, damage was difficult to estimate at this stage. The warehouses worst affected contained a large quantity of timber and building materials, said Mr. Peel. It seems unlikely that much of this can have escaped damage, in which case the cost is likely to run into several £1,000s. Interviewed at the scene last night, the chief of the Paxton Fire Brigade, 42-year-old Mr. Fred Banks, who is responsible for bonfire night safety measures in the district, said that he thought the fire was very unfortunate. The organisers had consulted him about the safety of the site, and he had approved it, provided the bonfire itself was kept in the centre of the site, and that only wood was burnt on it. It seemed, however, that someone had thrown paper onto the fire, and the strong wind had carried some of this to the warehouses. There had also been reports that rival gangs of youths had been seen throwing fireworks at each other near the warehouses, and this might also have had something to do with the fire starting. Asked about the advisability of allowing a fire at all so near to buildings, Mr. Banks pointed out that there was no other open space available, and that the risk involved was negligible, given that the safety regulations would be strictly observed. When told of the fire chief's remarks, the bonfire's organiser, local businessman Mr. Ron Green, denied that anyone had put paper on the bonfire. Aware of danger. Mr. Green, 43, said that all the safety precautions suggested by the fire brigade had been carried out in full. We were well aware of the danger to the warehouses if these were not observed, he added. The wind, in his opinion, had been the cause of the fire spreading. It had been unexpectedly strong, and in spite of efforts by himself and his helpers, some sparks had been blown onto the warehouse roofs. When asked if he thought it was wise to go on using events in which there was an element of danger, such as bonfires, to raise money for charity, Mr. Green said that he could see no harm in it, provided that the organisers took proper precautions. Popular. The function was a popular one with the local people, and had raised a great deal of money over the years. Said Mr. Green, "This event has become a part of local social life, and the proceeds from it have helped many good causes. It would be a pity to think of banning the bonfire as a result of one accident." Referring to the allegations about fireworks being thrown by youths, he said that no such reports had reached him. "We always have stewards at the gates whose job it is to refuse entry to rowdy elements. It was not possible to prevent people being high-spirited at an occasion like this, but in past years crowd control had been good, and although fireworks had sometimes been thrown, it had never got out of hand. He intended to hold the bonfire again next year," he said.
Part 1, Unit 2. The language of the press. A feature article.
Why does English have no phrase like bon appétit? Has it ever occurred to you that there is no simple way of expressing your hope that someone will enjoy what he is about to eat? If you are entertaining, and say to your guest as you put his dinner before him, "I hope you like it," then he will probably think one of two things. Either that there is an element of doubt about the meal, or that there is an element of doubt about him, that the food is perhaps unusual, and he will not be enough of a gastronomic sophisticate to appreciate it. You can be certain of one thing. He will not interpret, "I hope you like it," in the same way that the Frenchman interprets bon appétit, as a wish that focuses itself on the eater and not on what is to be eaten. Those opposed to English cooking will no doubt explain the lack by pointing to the quality of food in this country. It's so bad, they will say, that no one ever really believes that it could be enjoyed. Hence, no need for a phrase that enjoins enjoyment. But surely not even English food can be as bad as all that. Anyway, it's not only a matter of food. Have you never felt the need for a simple, universal, and socially neutral expression to use when drinking with someone? The Spaniard has his salud, the German his Prosit, Swedes say skål, and the Frenchman simply and sincerely à votre santé. But what about the unfortunate English? For most of them, good health is impossibly old-fashioned and stuffy. It may be all right for lawyers and stockbrokers, doctors and dons, or for crusty colonels inside the four walls of a club. But in the boozer down the Old Kent Road, it just sounds out of place. It is true that there is a whole string of vaguely possible alternatives that range from the mildly jocular through the awkward to the phrasebook bizarre. And if you listen carefully, you may just hear people still saying, "Here's mud in your eye," "Here's the skin off your nose," "Down the hatch," or "all the best," as they sink their pints or sip their sherries. But mostly they take refuge nowadays in cheerio, or its truncated version, cheers. And even here, for some people there is a sneaking suspicion that the term is not quite right, that it is somehow a shade too breezy, and comes most easily from someone addicted to tweeds and the phrase "old chap." Even when taking our leave, it seems we English are victims of some strange deficiencies in our valedictory vocabulary. The standard term goodbye is both too formal and too final. It may be just the job for ushering someone out of your life altogether, but most leave-takings, for better or worse, are temporary affairs. Perhaps in an attempt to escape implications of finality, many people now say bye-bye instead. Others try to make this particularly nauseating bit of baby talk more acceptable by shortening it to bye. And in place of those many leave-takings which so easily accommodate the idea of another meeting, au revoir, auf Wiedersehen, arrivederci, and so on, we have, alas, only such sad colloquialisms as "so long" and "I'll be seeing you." These examples by no means exhaust the areas in which the English language doesn't exactly help social contact. They have been called linguistic gaps, and tend to turn up in some way or another in most languages. But according to Mr. Daniel Kane, a lecturer at the University of Chester, there seem to be more of them in English than in other languages, at least other Western European languages. At the moment, Mr. Kane is seeking funds to finance a small research project into the problem. He wants first of all to question a large number of people about their feelings on the matter. "After all, I must be certain that the man in the street is aware of these gaps in the same way that I think I am," says Mr. Kane. And then he proposes to compare English with several other languages in this respect, and look for possible sociological reasons for the differences he finds.
Part 1, Unit 3, The Language of Broadcasting, part of a news bulletin.
35 vehicles were involved in a multiple collision on the M1 motorway this morning. The accident occurred about 3 miles south of the Newport Pagnell service area, when an articulated lorry carrying a load of steel bars jackknifed and overturned. A number of lorry drivers and motorists were unable to pull up in time, and ran into the overturned vehicle, causing a major pile-up. Some of the steel bars from the load were flung by the impact across the Central Reserve into the southbound carriageway, which was restricted to single-lane working because of repairs and resurfacing, causing several minor accidents. With both carriageways blocked, police closed the motorway for a time, and diversion signs were posted at the nearest slip roads. Breakdown vehicles and ambulances had considerable difficulty in reaching the scene of the accident because of fog. This was dense in places, and the flashing amber light signals had been switched on for most of the night. So far, there are no reports of anyone seriously injured in the accident. This accident the fourth involving a multiple pile-up of vehicles in the last month, comes just as the first national conference on motorway use is getting underway. At the opening meeting in London last night, Sir John Stone, the Metropolitan Area Traffic Advisor, criticised the standard of motorway driving in this country. He said that there was evidence that many of the basic disciplines of motorway use had yet to be learned by British drivers. Lane discipline was much worse in this country than in America. And the habits of drivers when overtaking were particularly bad. One saw far too much dangerous pulling out without an adequate signal having been given. And there was a similarly dangerous tendency for drivers to cut in after overtaking. Perhaps the commonest form of misuse, however, was the reluctance of drivers of private cars to move into the inside lane whenever it was possible to do so. Sir John said that far too many were determined to stay in the middle or even the outside lanes regardless of traffic conditions, with the result that drivers wishing to overtake became impatient and tried to follow too closely behind the vehicle in front, thus making accidents more likely. The conference is continuing. Now the common market negotiations. Mr. Geoffrey Ripham, the chief negotiator, flew to Brussels last night. It is thought that the object of his journey is to attempt to reduce the disagreement between this country and the European Economic Community on what Britain's contribution to the community budget should be. Britain has put forward the suggestion that a reasonable contribution would be 13 to 15%, built up in a series of equal yearly steps over a period of 5 years. But the Council of Ministers is considering a recommendation that the British share should be 21.5% throughout the 5-year period of transition, or, alternatively, a contribution of between 10 and 15% in the first year, rising to between 20 and 25% in the 5th year. There have been signs that some European leaders are reluctant to take the present British offer seriously, and it is widely felt in Whitehall that Mr. Rippon's main task at the moment is to make it clear to the Six that the offer is viewed in this country as a reasonable and realistic one. The common market issue was also taken up today by officials of the National Farmers' Union, when they commented on a pamphlet issued by the Conservative Central Office. The pamphlet claims that, on balance, farmers would be better off if Britain joined the common market. The National Farmers' Union, however, points out that while farmers in Europe receive more for some products, such as barley, wheat, cattle and sugar, they get less for milk and pigs. In addition, says the Union, the pamphlet fails to mention horticulture, which constitutes an important part of British agriculture, and which is likely to be badly hit in the event of a link-up with the common market. The official said that in their view the pamphlet tended to overemphasize the benefits of joining the EEC and to leave out of account many genuine difficulties.
Part 1, Unit 4. The Language of Broadcasting. A Broadcast Talk.
So many of the productions currently to be seen on the London stage are concerned with the more violent aspects of life that it is surprising to meet a play about ordinary people caught up in ordinary events. Thomas Sackville's The Visitor at the Metropolitan Playhouse is just such a play, at least on the surface. It seems to stand well outside the mainstream of recent British drama, and any debts it may owe to the angry young man or kitchen sink traditions are far from obvious. Neither does it dabble in the absurd, and only in one brief but telling scene does it become even mildly experimental. In fact, the surface is so bland that attention is constantly focused on the care with which the play has been put together and the clarity with which its argument develops. It seems natural to discuss it in terms of the notion of the well-wrought play. The story is about an unremarkable family evening in middle-class suburbia. The husband, the characters are not given names and significantly never use names to address each other, comes home from his office and tells the wife that he has invited a friend to dinner. The friend, the visitor of the title, turns up in due course, and they talk about their respective lives and interests. During this conversation, in which the author shows a remarkable talent for writing dialogue which is entertaining and witty, without being so sparkling as to draw too much attention to itself, the characters are carefully fleshed out and provided with a set of credible, if unremarkable, motives. Through innumerable delicate touches in the writing they emerge, pleasant, humorous, ordinary and ineffectual. And if they are never made vibrantly alive in terms of the real world, one feels that this is deliberate, that the author is content to give them a theatrical existence of their own and leave it at that. After dinner, they sit down to watch a television program, and it is at this point that for the first and only time the play ceases to be a straight record of events. For one brief scene, which forms the climax of the play, the characters act out a fantasy in which the scale of values implicit in all that has gone before is subtly challenged. Lines of dialogue crisscross and intermingle with lines from the box, which squats talking to itself at the back of the stage, and the audience, gently but irresistibly, is made to think. The television program and the fantasy come to an end. The characters resume their normal behavior, and the play concludes very much as it began, with the visitor gone and the husband and wife alone once more. It is also smoothly done that the implicit questions do not begin to put themselves until almost the final curtain. I found myself becoming more and more aware that I was watching a play capable of two equally valid interpretations. On the one hand, it is a statement of the cosy banality of suburban middle-class life, and on the other it may be seen as an allegory about the nature of reality and illusion. The success of the play derives largely from the completely convincing way in which it fosters this awareness, and uses it to prod the audience, gently and urbanely, but nevertheless effectively, into thinking about the status quo and the human condition. Some splendid direction from Oscar Brereton results in consistently well-paced and well-spoken performances from Simon Lowe, bluff, considerate, and just faintly suggesting insensitivity as the husband, and Donald Macready as the handsome but otherwise ordinary visitor. The highlight of the evening, however, is Joanna Burling's wife, who seizes the imagination with her mixture of resignation and attractiveness that is just beginning to fade. In the fantasy scene especially, she is a delight to watch, handling what could be a difficult role with unfaltering deftness, and supplementing voice with gesture in a way that suggests she is a more accomplished actress than some critics have been prepared to admit. Sackville has given us several good plays to date, and now, I think, he has given us an outstanding one. It will be interesting to see where his talent leads him next.
Part 1, Unit 5. The language of spoken commentary. Extracts from a football commentary.
This is BBC Radio 4. We're now taking you over to Highbury Stadium for a commentary on the Football League match between Arsenal and Wolverhampton Wanderers. Your commentator this afternoon is James Cooper.
And this is James Cooper, welcoming listeners on this bright, sunny, rather mild mid-December afternoon to Highbury Stadium, where a capacity crowd are waiting to see how Arsenal, who are third in the table, face up to Wolves at home. Wolves, you'll remember, drew with Arsenal 1-1 in the away match at Molineux earlier in the season, but they've been playing very well lately, and Arsenal will have to be on top form if they're to keep their unbeaten home record intact. We're just waiting for the teams to come out onto the pitch now. And here they are. Arsenal, led by their captain Bobby Smith, who's having his best season with the club so far. And behind them come Wolves, led by Sammy Baker, who's been improving tremendously as a right half in the last few months, and who in fact has just been named by Sir Alf Ramsey as one of the reserves in the England team to meet West Germany in next week's international. The stadium flag now hardly fluttering on this fine afternoon as the crowd, and I should think it must be the largest this season, waits patiently while the teams warm up. And now I can see the referee calling the captains to the centre spot for the toss. Up goes the coin, and it looks as though Smith's won the toss. Yes, Smith has won the toss for Arsenal, and he's chosen to defend the Gillespie Road end. So Wolves will have to kick off into this rather bright sunshine and light breeze. And the ball goes out of play for a goal kick to Arsenal. Gould, the Arsenal goalkeeper, places the ball, runs up and boots it well upfield to Smart, the outside left. Smart traps it neatly and sets off at a cracking pace up the left wing. Hunt's there with him now, out on the left on the far side of the field, and at the moment the Wolves' defence is looking rather disorganised. Smart to Hunt. Hunt takes the ball forward quickly, cutting inside towards the Wolverhampton goal. Centre-half comes across and tries to intercept him, but Hunt slips past and quickly pushes the ball out to Smart again, who's still making ground up the left wing. Now Smart. He gathers the ball right on the touchline and brings it almost to the corner flag. Wolves right back is with him now, tackles, but Smart beats him, brings the ball clear, now he's looking for the centre-forward. He's still holding on to it. What's he going to do? He'll lose it if he's not careful. No! He swings it across the goal mouth hard and high. A beautiful centre. Johnson's right there, centre-forward's there, and he's unmarked, and he jumps. He gets his head to it, and oh, what a goal! What a beautiful goal! The Wolves goalie just didn't stand a chance with that one. Johnson took it beautifully, headed it like a bullet into the top left-hand corner of the net. Well, there's the first goal. Arsenal have opened the scoring, and as they make their way back to the centre spot, the crowd are still roaring their approval. And the whistle's gone for a foul, and it looks as if it was Parsons. Yes, the referee's coming across to him, and he's taking out his book. Yes, he's taking Parsons' name now, and I should think it was because of that rather heavy tackle. I must say Parsons is unlucky to be booked for that, because he's had to put up with quite a bit of rough play from Jones this afternoon. He's been marking Jones very closely, almost shutting him out of the game, and I think Jones has tended to get just a little rough as a result. But now Parsons has retaliated a bit too strongly, and he's ended up by having his name taken. This is quite a serious matter for Parsons, because he's already had his name taken 3 times this season, and although the disciplinary committee let him off with a caution on the first 3 occasions, he may well get suspended this time. And now the referee is placing the ball for a free kick to Wolves.
Part 1, Unit 6. The language of public speaking. Part of a lecture.
You will all have seen from the handouts which you have in front of you that I propose to divide this course of lectures on the urban and architectural development of London into 3 main sections. And perhaps I could just point out, right at the beginning, that there will be a good deal of overlap between them. They are intended to stand as separate, self-contained units. Indeed, I would go as far as to say that anyone who tried to deal entirely separately with the past, the present, and the course of development in the future would be misrepresenting the way in which urban growth takes place. Now, by way of introduction, I'd like to try and give some indication of how London itself originated, of what developmental trends were built into it, as it were, from the very outset, and of how these trends have affected its growth. It started, of course, not as 1, but as 2 cities. The Romans built a bridge across the Thames at a point where the estuary was narrow enough to make this a practical proposition, and the encampment associated with this bridge grew up on the north bank of the river. The principal fort of this encampment was on the site now occupied by the Tower. Further to the west, at a point where the river was fordable, an abbey, the Abbey of Westminster, was founded. And 2 towns grew up side by side, one centred on the Roman camp, and the other on the abbey. Now, in my next lecture, I hope to demonstrate in detail that this state of affairs, this double focus, as we might call it, was of crucial importance for the subsequent growth of London as a city, and that it had, moreover, a decisive influence on the architecture associated with the city. But for the moment, all I want you to do is to keep the fact of this double centre in mind, and to consider, in a fairly general way, what the early consequences were. Well, the first consequence, I suppose, is that the importance of the river itself was increased. Obviously, the river was from the beginning vitally important as the link with the outside world, the route followed by almost all traffic with the continent. But in addition to this, it was also, in the first place, the most important means of communication between the town centred on the Roman fort, which subsequently grew into the City of London, the city of trade and of the merchant guilds, and the other town focused on the Abbey, the royal city of Westminster. That was the first, and in many ways the most vital consequence of the double centre, as we've called it. But now, before mentioning some of the other consequences, and there were many of them, some very important and some much less so, now I'd like, if I may, to spend some time on this matter of internal communications. I'd like you to consider what happened as the 2 towns began to expand. What, do you think, the main consequences of expansion were? Well, obviously, the pressure for communication increased enormously, and the waterway itself became unable to supply the demand. And so, in addition, a road network began to develop, thus adding another physical bond between the two towns, and opening up the way for the urban proliferation which eventually cemented them together. But it's not the linking process that I'm concerned with just now. I shall go into this in greater detail later in the course. So let me concentrate on the growth of the land communications in early London. The chief road link was, of course, along what we now call the Strand, running from the City Bar to Charing Cross, and along the line of the Strand were built some of the great houses, such as Somerset House, which were at one and the same time in contact with the land route and with the water route. They had road gates at the front, and at the rear their grounds reached down to water gates, giving access to the river.
Part 1, Unit 7, The Language of Public Speaking. Part of a Sermon.
Psalm 127, verse 1. Except the Lord keep the city, the watchman waketh, but in vain. Many years ago, when I was vicar of a small parish in the north of England, I remember hearing a sad story of a certain businessman. He was a man well known in that small community for his honesty, his competence, and his capacity for hard work. Now it happened on one occasion that he was made responsible for the safekeeping of some vitally important papers, plans and documents concerning a new and secret process which was then being perfected by the company for which he worked. He decided to keep the papers in his office safe, and took extreme precautions to ensure that nothing went amiss. He arranged for a watch to be kept at night, and informed the local police. And yet, in spite of all his care and concern, the office was broken into, and the plans were stolen. The poor man was beside himself, and to cut a long story short, he resigned from his job, and spent the rest of his days in a very unhappy retirement. Now, where that unfortunate man went wrong is not that he failed to act the part of watchman with sufficient care, for surely we would all agree that he did everything that could have been expected of him in that direction. No. Where he went wrong was in expecting too much of himself, in not facing up to the fact that the possibility of failure is implicit in all human actions, in not realizing that, in the last resort, none but the Lord can keep the city. I would like to think that if this man had been possessed of a true and devout communion with God, and had been supported by the self-knowledge that can be derived from such a communion, I would like to think that he would have been better equipped to see his misfortune in a clearer light, and that he would not have succumbed so completely to the blow which fate had dealt him. All of us gathered here together this morning have suffered, I am sure, our own disasters, some great, some not so great. Disasters, indeed, are something that few of us can hope completely to avoid during the stormy course of life here on earth. And I am equally sure that many of us have been sustained at the times when misfortune has struck, by the realization that if only we will give him our trust, the Lord will be there to keep the city. Man alone cannot hope to be the defender of his own city. Can we honestly say, any of us, that by our own efforts alone we can be certain of maintaining our defenses intact? Try as we will, take whatever precautions we can think of, somewhere, sometime, we are certain to fail. There are so many doubts and uncertainties to assail mortal souls, so many enemies who come by night and conquer by stealth. No. Only God can fulfill the role of ultimate defender. We must be content to try and keep watch. And even in our modest attempts to do this, we must not forget to turn to God. For it is only through a true awareness of His holiness, an awareness of how readily we may draw on the limitless fund of His manifold and great mercies, that we can find the spiritual insight and moral energy to make us effective watchmen.
Part 1, Unit 8. The language of public speaking. Part of a political speech.
The time has almost come, ladies and gentlemen, when the government must ask you, the electors of Great Britain, to renew its mandate. It is as a member of the government that I stand before you this evening, and the task I have set myself is to review the many things which the government has achieved since the last general election, and to outline the path which we hope to follow in the future, when, as I am confident will be the case, you return us to office with an even greater parliamentary majority. No one will deny that what we've been able to do in the past 5 years is especially striking in view of the crisis which we inherited from the previous government, with wages and prices spiralling upwards, with a record trade deficit of hundreds of millions of pounds, and with the pound sterling afflicted by the evaporation of international confidence. The country was then on the brink of financial disaster and economic collapse. But within a very short time of coming back into power, the present government had taken steps to stabilize the position. No doubt you will remember some of those steps. Many of them were painful at the time, but they were necessary if international confidence was to be restored, and we did not flinch from taking them. First of all, we applied ourselves to identifying the root causes of our national ailments, examining contemporary evidence, and refusing to be slaves to outmoded doctrinaire beliefs. Secondly, we embarked on a reasoned policy to ensure steady economic growth, the modernization of industry, and a proper balance between public and private expenditure. Thirdly, by refusing to take refuge, as the previous government had continually done in the preceding years, in panic-stricken stopgap measures, we stimulated the return of international confidence. As a result of those immediate measures, and aided by the tremendous effort which they evoked from the British people, who responded as so often before to a firm hand at the helm, as a result of those measures, we weathered the storm and moved on into calmer waters and a period of economic expansion and social reorganization. We took as our first objective the problem of productivity. For far too long, the average level of productivity in this country had been lower than was to be expected when the quality of the labor force was considered. We attacked restrictive practices wherever they existed. We instituted measures for the more rational deployment of labor, and we greatly improved the relationship between management and workers. The result, as you all know, is that productivity is higher now than ever before. Then we embarked on a nationwide scheme of regional planning, both industrial and social, thereby ensuring that areas of the country, which had for years been underproductive and undersupplied with social amenities, were able to contribute more effectively to the national effort. Next, we instituted the largest program of educational expansion that the country has ever seen. From infant school to university, the nation's educational resources were extended and revitalized in a way that over the years will ensure that our greatest national asset, our children and young people, will continue to get the education that they deserve. Finally, we made sweeping reductions in government expenditure. The whole area of national and local government was subjected to a most searching financial scrutiny, and wherever they occurred, inefficiency and waste were attacked, and non-essential projects were brought swiftly to an end. It was partly as a result of those economies that many of our most important new projects in other fields became possible. These new projects have enabled us to lay a firm foundation for better things. It is at this stage that we may confidently begin to examine the route we wish to follow in the future.
Part 1, Unit 9. Descriptive writing. Part of a travelogue. Situated in the southeastern corner of England and within easy reach of London, the counties of Kent and Sussex provide between them the pleasantest countryside and the most convenient stretch of coastline for anyone wishing to explore the surroundings of the capital. In many ways very different from each other, containing as they do a wealth of varied scenery, villages, towns and architecture, they are geographically united by the Weald, a great stretch of what was formerly forest land that runs westward from the heart of Kent through Sussex almost to the borders of Hampshire. This inland plain, once a ridge of chalk upland but now eroded, is largely denuded of the trees, mainly oaks, which covered it so densely during the Middle Ages, and which were a seemingly inexhaustible source of timber until they succumbed in later centuries to the charcoal burner and the builder. Known by the Saxons as Andrid, this forest was penetrated by few tracks until Elizabethan times, and it did much to isolate the ancient kingdom of the South Saxons, as well as parts of Kent, from the rest of the country. To the south, the Weald is bounded by the majestic sweep of the South Downs, the rolling chalk hills which curve in from the far west to terminate on the Sussex coast in the magnificent cliffs 500 feet high, which plunge into the sea at Beachy Head, near Eastbourne. And from their many vantage points on a clear day may be seen the hills forming the northern boundary of the Weald, the North Downs, which in their turn conclude as the White Cliffs of Dover. Not least of the delights which Kent and Sussex have to offer the visitor are the many villages and small towns which dot the plain of the Weald and nestle in the downland valleys. In Kent, these villages are typically scattered through the hop fields and orchards which form such a prominent feature of this garden of England. Some of the more famous Kentish villages are Brenchley, with its weatherboarded houses, Cobham, with its palace, Ightham, with its mansion surrounded by a moat, and such places as Ainsford, Hollingbourne, Goudhurst, and Tenterden. In Sussex, sheltered by the northern slopes of the South Downs, may be found a cluster of villages and small market towns, which for secluded old-world charm are scarcely to be rivalled in the length and breadth of England. Chief among these, and set in a gentle countryside of meadowland and meandering streams, criss-crossed by hedge-lined lanes which seem to have little idea of where they are going, is Alfriston, with its ancient church, its picturesque inns once the haunt of smugglers, and its famous Market Cross. But also worthy of exploration are many more, including Amberley, Graffham, Midhurst, Poynings, and Wilmington. Villages such as these provide endless scope for gentle browsing, but the visitor with a taste for things which are historically and architecturally more dramatic is similarly well provided for in these two counties by their wealth of castles and stately homes. In Knowle, near Sevenoaks in Kent, for instance, he will find one of the stateliest homes in England, with its great grounds and its 365 rooms, while at Petworth House in Sussex he can see a superb example of the great English country mansion. Here can be seen a picture gallery containing a number of paintings of local scenes by Turner, in addition to a splendid suite of reception rooms. One of these, the carved room, was designed and decorated by the famous 17th century woodcarver, Grinling Gibbons. In Kent, the castles include that at Leeds, dating from the 14th century, and although extensively restored, still an outstanding example of a medieval moated stronghold, and the great Norman castle at Dover, which towers on its cliff above the famous harbour, gateway to England. Sussex boasts many castles, such as Hastings and Pevensey, which sprang up as a means of defending coastal landing places and river mouths, and others, like Bodiam, Arundel, and Lewes, which were further inland, and defended fords or bridges across the rivers. Of all these, Bodiam, perhaps, is the most perfect survival. Set among beautiful meadows and circled by its moat, it lies close to the Kent border, where, for the visitor whose time is limited, it provides the readiest imaginable gateway into both the history and the rural charm of this corner of England. Part 1, Unit 10, Scholarly Writing. An extract from a book on literary style. In the last chapter, it was argued that in order to be fully adequate, a theory of style must be capable of application to both literary and non-literary uses of language. It was further maintained that this distinction between uses, even though in no sense an absolute distinction, is not a factitious one, and evidence was adduced to show that it is both real and moreover essential to the study of stylistic theory and method. At this point, it becomes necessary as a preliminary exercise to review some of the more influential ways in which the term style has been used in the past. This review must be undertaken for two reasons. First, to ensure that the definition of style, which it is hoped to arrive at in this book, may be seen in a proper relation to other relevant definitions put forward in the past, and second, so that a number of theoretical confusions implicit in some of those definitions may be identified and cleared from the path of argument. Style has often been seen as some kind of additive by which a basic content of thought may be modified. Stated in a somewhat different way, this view of style sees it as the variable means by which a fixed message may be communicated in a more effective, or possibly less effective, manner. The danger of too uncritical an assumption of these and similar notions of style is that they accept as axiomatic the possibility of distinguishing between a thought in some pre-linguistic form and the same thought as it issues in words. That individual writers or speakers may in certain circumstances be identified through specimens of their discourse has given rise to another highly influential notion of style as a set of individual characteristics. Taken to extremes, this view ends up by equating an individual with his style. The style is said to be the man. More moderately and more usefully, the notion has been applied to some subset of the total linguistic characteristics rather than to the whole observable range. But even when so restricted, there remains a danger here. Many striking stylistic features may not be the property of one individual at all. They may belong to and identify a group of people. A notion that concentrates exclusively on the individual may wrongly identify as the property of a single writer stylistic traits which should rightly be used to relate him to other writers. Style as a group-identifying phenomenon is of course an idea which in its turn has had wide currency, and as the corrective for an over-simple conception of individual style, it is extremely valuable. It is valuable, too, in the study of non-literary uses of language, where the linguistic habits characteristic of groups that are also definable by non-linguistic criteria, such as scientists, lawyers, lecturers, and those on intimate terms with each other, are very often of the greatest interest to the stylistician. Moreover, this concept of style has received wide application in literary studies, as the basis of attempts to define the salient linguistic features of literary genre. But it is in literary studies that its chief deficiency shows up most sharply, a deficiency which is the obverse of that found in the definition of style as a set of individual characteristics. To see style as a function of group activity may dissipate efforts to discover which features of a writer's language can really be said to mark him as unique. The identification of the unique is, after all, at the center of literary studies. Part 2, Unit 1, Business and Commercial Language, an exchange of letters.
Dear Mr. Weston, I have been asked by Mr. James Payne, Managing Director of Hawks Engineering, to get in touch with you concerning the installation of new plating and polishing plant at our Slough factory, which your firm is undertaking. As Chief Engineer at Hawks, I shall be in charge of the installation at this end, and I shall be very grateful if you will consult me whenever you feel it to be necessary, and also if you will see that all correspondence, telephone queries, etc., which may arise in connection with the installation are directed to my office. Mr. Payne is particularly anxious that this installation should be commenced as soon as any remaining problems have been cleared up, and should proceed as quickly as possible, with a view to completion by the end of May at the latest. I have seen the detailed specifications which your firm submitted in connection with the polishing plant installation, and they seem to me to be very comprehensive and highly satisfactory in almost all respects. There is one point, however, which I should like.
Part 2, Unit 1, Business and Commercial Language, an exchange of letters.
Dear Mr. Weston, I have been asked by Mr. James Payne, Managing Director of Hawks Engineering, to get in touch with you concerning the installation of new plating and polishing plant at our Slough factory, which your firm is undertaking. As Chief Engineer at Hawks, I shall be in charge of the installation at this end, and I shall be very grateful if you will consult me whenever you feel it to be necessary, and also if you will see that all correspondence, telephone queries, etc., which may arise in connection with the installation are directed to my office. Mr. Payne is particularly anxious that this installation should be commenced as soon as any remaining problems have been cleared up, and should proceed as quickly as possible, with a view to completion by the end of May at the latest. I have seen the detailed specifications which your firm submitted in connection with the polishing plant installation, and they seem to me to be very comprehensive and highly satisfactory in almost all respects. There is one point, however, which I should like to bring to your attention. It seems to me from the drawings that your surveyor has not made adequate provision for strengthening of the floor of the main polishing shop. We pointed out to him at the time of his inspection of the premises that there seemed to have been a certain amount of subsidence in the flooring, as evidenced by cracking of the concrete, which in the northeast corner particularly is quite extensive. Since this is the point at which the heaviest of the new machines is to be located, it would seem to be especially important to ensure that the floor is equal to the loads it will have to bear. And from inspection of your plans, I cannot say that I feel completely confident that the strengthening suggested there is sufficient. Perhaps you would be kind enough to take another look at this particular detail, and let me know what you feel. I look forward to hearing from you, and if you are in need of any further information, please do not hesitate to contact me. Yours faithfully, J.F. Marsh.
Dear Mr. Marsh, thank you for your letter of January the 10th, 1970, reference JFM/GB/3606-1. I have taken note of your request that all correspondence and telephone calls connected with the installation of your new plating and polishing plant should be directed to your office. I am also aware of the importance of completing this job on schedule. You may rest assured that we shall do our best to meet the completion date. I intend to assume overall control of this contract myself, and I shall be obliged if you will contact me personally in the event of any queries that may arise during the course of installation. Thank you for calling my attention to the matter of the flooring in the main polishing shop. I have consulted our surveyor, Mr. Roberts, about this, and he assures me that during his inspection he took careful note of the subsidence involved, and that the proposed strengthening measures are quite adequate for the loads envisaged. However, since the survey was originally made some 3.5 months ago, it is possible that there has been further deterioration of the floor. In view of this possibility, Mr. Roberts agrees with me that it would be advisable to do another inspection of that part of the floor. He will accordingly be visiting your factory again as soon as you find it convenient. Would you be so kind as to let me know the most suitable time for his visit? The inspection should not take very long, and will not involve the use of any elaborate equipment. Would you also let me have final details of where the main ventilator outlet duct is to be sited? You will recall that this information was not to hand when the preliminary details of the plant layout were settled, because you were still at that stage engaged in a building alteration to your main factory roof. But I assume that a decision will have been reached by now. I shall be glad to have the details, so that I shall be in a position to issue instructions for commencement of the installation. Yours faithfully, R.D. Weston.
Part 2, Unit 2. Business and Commercial Language. A telephone conversation.
Good morning, Hawks Engineering. Can I help you?
I'd like to speak to Mr. James Marsh, please. I think it's extension 47.
Who's calling, please?
My name is Weston. I'm from Plant Installations Limited.
Will you hold the line a moment, Mr. Weston? I'll see if Mr. Marsh is free.
Yes, thank you.
Hello, Marsh speaking.
Oh, hello, Mr. Marsh. I've got a Mr. Weston from Plant Installations on the line. Can you speak to him now?
Oh, yes, thank you. Put him through, please.
You're through now, Mr. Weston.
Hello, Mr. Weston. What can I do for you?
Good morning, Mr. Marsh. You'll remember that our surveyor took another look at the floor of your main polishing shop last week?
Yes?
Well, I've just got his report, and I thought I'd let you know the result.
Splendid. That was quick work.
Yes, it was quite quick, wasn't it? And you'll be pleased to know that he's been able to confirm what he said in his original report.
Has he? Oh, good.
Yes, he says that the subsidence hasn't gone any further since he first inspected the floor, and that there's no need to increase the strengthening measures he recommended.
Well, I'm very pleased to hear that, Mr. Weston. You've taken a load off my mind.
Yes, I'm glad that it won't be necessary to hold things up on account of the floor. I'll confirm all this in writing, of course, but I thought that I'd let you know as soon as possible, in the hope that we could agree on a definite starting date.
Yes, of course.
If we can fix that, then I can go ahead with arrangements here.
Well, it'll take us about 2 days to finish off the outstanding work in the plating and polishing shops, and then you can have a free hand to begin your operations. How does that suit you?
2 days. That brings us to Thursday morning, doesn't it?
Thursday, yes.
And I did understand you to say that we could continue working at weekends.
Yes, that's right.
Well, in that case, Thursday morning will suit us very well. I'll put it in hand straight away.
Good.
Now, there is one other matter that I'd like to discuss briefly with you, if you can spare the time. I'm not keeping you from anything, am I?
No, I do have a meeting in about half an hour, but I'm at your disposal until then, so please carry on, Mr. Weston.
Well, this is a point which concerns the outlet duct for the main ventilator.
Ah, yes. You asked to be sent the final plans, didn't you? Did you get those?
Yes, thanks. Your secretary sent them on to me. Now, I see from the plans that you intend the duct to be placed alongside an existing chimney. Do you recall that?
That's right.
Well, what I'd like to know is whether the chimney is strong enough to support the duct, or whether we shall have to construct independent supports. Now, unfortunately, at the time of our survey, we didn't think to inspect the chimney.
No, of course, because at that stage we still hadn't decided exactly where the duct was to go.
Quite. So can you give me any idea of the strength of the chimney? You see, if we can use it as a support and bolt the duct brackets directly to it, this will mean a simpler job, and it should also save a certain amount of time.
And it'll be cheaper, too.
Yes, quite a bit cheaper, in fact.
Well, all I can tell you at the moment is that the chimney was only built a couple of years ago, and is in good structural condition. What I can't tell you with any degree of certainty is whether it'll stand up to the kind of stress you're proposing to put on it. As far as I can remember, it's a pretty strong job, so it should be all right.
Yes. Well, it looks quite strong on your plans, but I can't really tell because they're not sufficiently detailed.
No. Well, look, Mr. Weston, I think we'd better not take any risks over this. I'll call in a building expert and get him to examine the chimney, and perhaps you'll be good enough to send me brief details of the loadings involved and the kind of brackets you're thinking of using and so on. And I'll put them in front of him and see what he thinks.
Yes, I can get that in the post this evening.
You can? Fine.
Well, that answers my question, Mr. Marsh. Thank you very much.
Not at all. And thank you for letting me know about the report so quickly. I'll get things moving here, and we'll expect your men to start work on Thursday morning.
Yes, they'll be there. Goodbye, Mr. Marsh. I'll be in touch again when the work's started.
Bye, Mr. Weston.
Part 2, Unit 3. Business and Commercial Language. A letter of application.
Dear Sir, I should like to be considered for the post of personnel manager at your Croydon factory, which was advertised in the Sunday Chronicle on February the 15th, 1971. The relevant information concerning my education and professional experience is as follows. From 1960 to 1963, I studied sociology at the University of Harrogate, and graduated with a second-class honours degree, lower division, in that subject. The main degree course was concerned with basic sociological topics, such as the history and theory of sociology, but there were also a number of optional courses available. From amongst these I selected the history of industrial sociology and the psychology of management. In order to satisfy part of the requirements for my finals examination, I had to submit a short dissertation involving original research. I wrote a paper on 19th century industrial relations in Yorkshire, and for this section of my examination received a mark of distinction. Whilst at university, I took an active part in a number of social activities, and was secretary of both the Drama Society and the Student Sociological Society. On leaving university, I was a student for a year at the North Yorkshire Business College, where I was successful in obtaining a diploma in Industrial Management Class 1. Courses at this college covered a wide field relevant to the management studies in general, and I was able to supplement my theoretical knowledge with a great deal of practical experience of such things as office management, personnel selection, and the development and modification of work schedules. But it was in the area of personnel management and control that I found my interests developing most fully, and I took all available opportunities of increasing my knowledge of theory and practice in this field. From July 1964, when I left Business College, until September 1968, I was employed as an assistant personnel officer with Messrs. James Bradley at their Leeds factory. The company manufactures a wide range of small components for use in the electronics and motor industries, and employed at that time a labour force of approximately 500 men and women. My duties were concerned mainly with the selection of personnel, for work both in the factory and also on the clerical and administrative side. But I was also largely responsible for liaison between the departments concerned with production and the welfare department. I enjoyed the work at Bradley's very much, especially in that it kept me closely in touch with both workers and management. But after 4 years' experience there, and in the absence of any prospects of promotion, I applied for, and was successful in obtaining, the post of Deputy Personnel Manager with Yorkshire Engineers Limited of Keighley. I began work there in September 1968, and am still employed in the same post. My work at Yorkshire Engineers is in many ways similar to that which I was doing previously, but since the factory is engaged in heavy engineering, I have been able to gain experience of recruiting and administering a rather different kind of labour. The work, again, I have found absorbing and rewarding, but I feel that at this stage of my career I should like more responsibility and greater scope for putting into effect some of the more up-to-date ideas that are now being developed and applied in the field of personnel management and control. It is for this reason that I am now submitting this application for your consideration. In your advertisement, you asked applicants to provide information on leisure activities which may be considered relevant. Amongst my numerous out-of-work activities, there are two that I should like to mention in this connection. First, I have continued ever since university to read widely in the literature relevant to my occupation, and I find time occasionally to contribute articles to several of the journals in this field. Details of my publications are provided on an attached sheet. Second, I began doing some voluntary social work while at Business College, and have gradually extended my commitment in this direction ever since. I enclose copies of 2 recent testimonials, and the names and addresses of 2 people who are prepared to act as my referees. I hope that the information I have provided in this letter and the enclosures is sufficient for your purposes, but I shall of course be glad to expand it should you wish. Yours faithfully, Robert D.
Part 2, Unit 4, Business and Commercial Language. A Company Chairman's Report.
I have pleasure in being able to report that the group results for the year 1970, when viewed against the background of industrial unrest and continued credit restrictions, are not unsatisfactory. Group profits before tax of £4,664,000 show an improvement of £840,000, and the after-tax profit is £2,825,000 compared with £2,103,000 in the previous year. Your directors are asking you to approve a final dividend of 4.5%, from which income tax will be deducted at the standard rate of 42.5% and accounted for to the inland revenue. This final dividend, together with the interim paid earlier in the year, makes the total dividend 8% in respect of 1970, as compared with 7.5% last year. As you have been reminded in the annual report, 1970 marked the 50th anniversary of our organization, and it seems fitting that at the conclusion of our first half-century I should be able to report a more than usually eventful year. The results for our group mining interests were particularly gratifying, and should be further enhanced by the opening of the Clay River and Carrington mines, which were successfully brought into production on schedule. As a result of unforeseen complications with flooding, Carrington mine did not contribute to profits. But I have no doubt that when this teething trouble has been successfully resolved, the mine will come fully up to expectation as a significant source of profit along with that at Red River, which continues to make encouraging progress. In the engineering division, our new foundry at Gateshead commenced production, and the profits in that quarter are an outstanding tribute to efforts to reduce unit manufacturing and marketing costs. Output was maintained at predicted levels despite a series of strikes, and costs were well contained in the teeth of the continuing pressures of inflation. Further economies are being planned in the handling section, and it is anticipated that these, together with still further streamlining of marketing operations, will offset any increased costs of production which may be incurred. Our transport activities were marked by the acquisition of a new fleet of heavy goods vehicles, now operating from the Fawley Centre. Broadly speaking, the volume of freight handled increased, despite setbacks in some of the specialist areas, and this may be taken as indicative of future prospects. These, however, depend upon the extent to which we are successful in absorbing the recent cost increases attributable to last month's pay settlement with the Drivers' and Loaders' Union. We are continuing to extend operations from the Fawley Centre in the expectation that there will be no undue rise in freight rates. In all, it may be said that the aim of group companies to improve profitability has been reasonably met. But progress in this direction will, nevertheless, not continue automatically. It must be the outcome of careful investment, wise forward planning, and above all, of hard work by everyone employed within the companies of the group. We must remember that our total force of employees is our most important resource. And I should like, on behalf of shareholders, to recognize the selfless efforts of many of the group servants in working towards the achievement of our aims. You would like me, I am sure, to comment upon our future prospects. In view of present economic conditions, this is not an easy task. Any material degree of industrial recession at home would necessarily have its effect upon group profitability, which could also be adversely affected by circumstances beyond our control, both at home and overseas. Although it is not at the moment possible to assess such considerations with any degree of accuracy, their importance must be borne in mind. Subject to these reservations, however, there seems no immediate reason to suppose that in the current year group results will prove to be less favourable than in the past.
Part 2, Unit 5, Business and Commercial Language, part of a stock market report.
In the London stock market today, the downward drift in prices continued, and the week ended on a depressed note. Jobbers lost no time in slashing prices as soon as dealing commenced this morning, following the further heavy falls on Wall Street yesterday, which were again a major influence, and by the close another long list of falls had been established. The Economist Extel indicator fell 4.2 to 387.6. The Financial Times Industrial Ordinary Share Index fell 2.7 to 322.0. Gilt-edged made the best showing, and prices improved by up to an eighth. Greek bonds hardened a 16th, while war loan returned to favour and was up to 2 points better. Commonwealth issues went well, and recently issued industrial fixed interest stocks remained quietly firm. Once again, equities were hard hit generally, but the worst sufferers were those shares with small dividend cover. Stores dropped back still further. Good and Rich at 136 pence, and Horfield at 95p, both reach new low levels for the year. Steel shares reacted after their recent improvement and were looking weak at the close, on a feeling that government plans for denationalisation did not meet previous expectations. Electricals were a generally dull market, and motors lost ground. British cars were among the many leaders to show small falls, and international UK eased in spite of the increased interim dividend and the forecast of a material advance in profits. Smith Henry led aircraft lower. Southfield were down 2 1/4p at 42p on the redundancy statement, and Scottish Aviation were similarly lower at a 1970-71 low of 140p. Textiles were inclined to improve slightly, the group being featured by a rise of 3 3/4p to 37p in jute industries. Stretchers recovered nearly 5p after early losses, closing well above the worst. The firm exception in building shares was Smither, which advanced 4p to 157 on better-than-expected results. In catering shares, Cutler's edged a little higher, but Marvel, on the other hand, receded afresh. In dull hotels, Forthdale picked up a penny at 107. Fine shoes jumped 7.5p to 155. Tobacco shares remained subdued, with sentiment adversely affected by the report on smoking, but losses were limited to a few pence, on a feeling that the government's reception of the report was more non-committal than had been expected. Shippings showed small movements, and at the close presented a mixed appearance. Oil suffered from renewed weakness. On the London foreign exchange market, sterling again held firm, with a slight advance against the US dollar, reflecting speculative demand in front of tomorrow's announcement on bank rate, and in New York, spot sterling edged higher. Most continental currencies firmed. On the London Metal Exchange, copper opened steady in sympathy with Messina, but then drifted lower on a feeling that the recent statement on US copper disposals was rather bearish. Tin showed modest net gains. Continental demand for tin was quiet, but it seems that some business matured on American account. Usually reliable trade sources said that Japan was seeking tin in view of the recent closure of the smelter, which normally supplies the greater part of that country's domestic needs. In New York, zinc futures developed gains ranging to more than 2 cents a pound before profit-taking reduced the advance. Persistent buying on statistical considerations lifted cash copper more than 200p a ton to a new peak, while lead drifted gently upward. London cocoa futures dropped back on profit-taking after early firmness and closed barely steady. Rubbers remained quiet with a slightly firmer look. On the London vegetable oils and oilseed market, soft varieties were very firm.
Part 2, Unit 6, The Language of Instruction. Extracts from 2 operating manuals.
How to operate your washermatic. 1. Move the washermatic into a convenient position near your sink. See that all controls are in the off position. Remove the lid by sliding it towards the right and gently disengaging from the retaining catch. Attach the adjustable end of the filling hose provided to your tap. This end can be made to fit any size of tap by tightening or loosening the adjuster screw. Fill the tub to the level required, taking care that the water does not rise above the point indicated by the red line running around the inside of the tub. The tub is designed to take a family wash of up to 7 pounds weight of dry clothes. Smaller loads may be washed using less water, but see that the agitator blades are covered to a depth of at least 4 inches. The washermatic is now ready to be plugged into the electric socket and switched on. 2. Switch the water heater to on and move the heater control lever upwards until it is opposite the recommended temperature. The temperature is automatically controlled, and the heater may be left on for the duration of the wash. The heater control lever may be reset if a higher or lower temperature is required. The red indicator light will go out when the water reaches the temperature indicated by the control lever. The heater will bring cold water to the boil if required, but using hot water to fill the tub will enable the correct washing temperature to be reached more quickly. 3. Before washing, see that all tears in the clothes have been mended. Tie loosely any strings, pajama cords, etc. Sort the washing into as recommended in the table below. Put in the washing, pushing each item into the water separately and distributing evenly around the agitator. 4. Move the wash control lever to the required time. This will start the washing action. The washer will now be working automatically and may be left until it switches itself off at the right time. 5. Take the clothes from the wash tub and place them in the spin dryer, ensuring that they are distributed evenly around the drum. Secure the special retaining lid on top of the drum. 6. Switch the spinner control lever to on. The spinner will start and suds will be returned to the wash tub.
Making a recording. 1. Before removing the lid, unscrew the panel which is located on the right-hand side of the recorder and check the mains voltage. The number showing through the small slot inside the panel must correspond to the voltage of your mains supply. The mains lead may now be connected to the electric wall socket. 2. Connect the microphone to the socket at the rear marked M. Take off the lid. 3. Thread by placing full spool on left-hand spindle. Take tape from full spool via the slot in the head cover and wind the red leader tape and metallized switching leader onto the empty spool, turning this in an anti-clockwise direction for a few turns. 4. Switch mains switch on the top panel to the on position. Turn speed selector control to the required tape speed position. The green warning light will now be illuminated. 5. Move control lever to record position. Before this can be done, it is necessary to depress the red record safety button. 6. Adjust the recording level by speaking in a normal voice into the microphone from a distance of 18 inches. Turn recording level control in a clockwise direction, noting amount by which the pointer is deflected on the recording level meter. The level is correctly set when the indicator travels almost to the end of the green segment during the loudest passages. The pointer must not be allowed to move into the red segment, or distortion of the recording will result. 7. Move start lever to the on position. You are now recording. To stop recording, move start lever back to off. 8. Move control lever from record to rewind and start the recorder. When the tape has rewound onto the left-hand spool, stop the recorder. 9. Move control lever to the play position and start the recorder. The recording will now be played back.
Part 2, Unit 7, The Language of Advertising. Examples of advertisements from television and the press.
Carvers can do a job like this, because only Carvers have the new SuperDrive electric power pack. Ordinary power tools have ordinary motors, but Carvers have a power pack, and it's power that packs a punch. See how they can saw, power saw, and drill, power drill, and sand, power sand. Carver's Power Pack power tools lend more power to your elbow. Carver's, see them now at your local Power Pack stockist.
Give your family a treat with Beefy, the tenderest, juiciest steak that ever got inside a tin. Large chunks of prime meat in rich, rich gravy to give you satisfaction every time.
Just make a pastry case and empty in a tin of beefy. Result, the best steak pie your family ever tasted. Go on, stake your reputation on it. Beefy.
Petal Drops, for the girl who wants a petal-soft skin. With Petal Drops Moisturizing Bath Essence, you can give your skin a petal-fresh softness and fragrance that will last and last the whole day through. Because Petal Drops is a special blend of mild, soapless oils, delicately perfumed herbal essences, and the gentlest of toning agents, all combined with loving care to give that oh-so-good-to-be-alive feeling. Relax. Petal drop your way to a smooth, silky skin. Choose from 2 exciting fragrances, new Petal Drops Coriander, with its faintly spiced hint of seductiveness, or the classic Petal Drops Lavender.
Hotel Caliente, Barcelona. Sea, sun, sand, seclusion, and Spain. You can have all these at a price that is hard to believe when you visit the new Hotel Caliente. Set in cool, palm-fringed grounds, but only 20 sun-soaked steps from the beach, this new luxury hotel looks out on a magnificent sweep of the Costa Brava. You will only have one point of view about the rooms when you've considered their carpeted comfort and their crisp, neat, individual decor. And the rooms have only one point of view about the sea, towards it. Bask on the balcony. You can still keep an eye on the children, even if they won't come in from that beach. And in the evening, explore the excitements of our uniquely varied menu. No need to hurry either. A special microphone babysitting system sees to that. If you haven't heard enough already to start you reaching for your pen, remember the swimming pool, and the cabaret, and the room service. Oh, and the price. You certainly won't forget that. Write for details to the manager.
Look at a new Tornado 2-liter before you leap into anything else. A long, cool look at the latest Tornado 2-liter could be the start of a very beautiful friendship. Beautiful's the word. A gleaming, flint-hard finish you'll be pleased to see your face in, and an occasional discreet flick of stainless steel. And it's more than skin deep. A new process ensures that the bits you don't see are just as well protected from the weather. Then there are the features you'll still be friendly with long after you've got into the habit of taking the beauty for granted. Like the engine, 2 liters of quiet power tucked under the bonnet, and the specially designed turbo-mechanical transmission which handles all that power without so much as a whimper. Or the all-round servo-assisted disc brakes. Sometimes, even in the best friendships, you have to put your foot down. And then there are the seats, firm enough to cradle you through the craziest corners, supple enough to support and soothe you on the straightest motorway. But friendships have to be made. So make your mind up now to come round to the showroom. Take a test drive. Feel the Tornado under power. Take that long, cool look. Take a look at the price. And then leap.
Part 2, Unit 8, Administrative Language. Part of the directions for filling in a tax return.
How to complete your return. 1. Trade or profession. Enter the full amount of income, including profits, bonus, commission, fees, etc., for the year ended the 5th of April, 1971. Enter the nature of each trade or profession in which you were engaged during the tax year, stating in each case whether you were self-employed or employed either full-time or part-time by another person. Enter, in accordance with the directions in the appropriate section, the total income arising from each employment. If A. You were responsible for certain payments, other than those for which tax relief may be claimed elsewhere in this return, in the pursuit of your trade or profession, or B. Any foreign tax for which credit is not allowable in this country was levied on your income, Or C. You incurred any loss in respect of capital depreciation, excluding that part of such loss chargeable to expenses under the provisions of Section 18E below, you are entitled to deduct the amounts concerned in order to arrive at the total income to be declared for tax purposes. Full particulars must be provided on a separate sheet. 2. Child's income. In certain instances, the income of an infant who is unmarried and not in regular employment is treated for tax purposes as income of the parent. An infant is regarded as being in regular employment if he is and intends to remain working either full-time or, if part-time, not less than half full-time, for a period of 6 months or more. Where the infant is domiciled separately from the parent or guardian for not less than half of the year for which tax is being assessed, the parent or guardian may, under certain circumstances, become eligible for an allowance in respect of expenses incurred. 3. Income from property. Enter the total amount of any rent accruing from the letting or hiring of furnished or unfurnished property. Deduct admissible expenses and state the net income in the space provided. Enclose a detailed statement showing how the amount of your expenses was arrived at. You may include 1. Rates and rent, 2. The cost of structural maintenance, 3. Letting and management charges paid to an agent, 4. Insurance premiums, excluding those for policies covering third-party risks only. Where the income derives from properties situated outside the United Kingdom, the basis on which tax and allowances are calculated is different, and you should obtain from the Inspector of Taxes a copy of the leaflet Notes on the Taxation of Rents from Property Outside the United Kingdom. 4. Other income. Enter the total amount of any other income not declared under sections 1 to 3 above. Enclose a detailed statement showing the sources of this income and stating the amounts separately. If you are unable to state the whole of your other income for any reason, e.g. because of late payments of fees, royalties, etc., do not delay sending in your return. Make a supplementary statement when details become available. 5. Cessation of income. If you cease to possess a source of income during the year ended the 5th of April 1971, full details should be given. Adjustments will then be made to secure that tax is charged only on income actually received. 6. Allowances. You may claim certain allowances in respect of expenses incurred by you wholly and exclusively in pursuit of your trade or profession. A. If a motor vehicle is provided by you at your own expense and is used solely in the pursuit of your trade or profession, you may claim 1. An allowance in respect of wear and tear, 2. If the vehicle was purchased during the year ended the 5th of April 1971, an allowance equal to 1/3 of the cost of the car.
Part 2, Unit 9, Legal Language. Part of a lease.
This lease, made the 4th day of December 1970, between Residential Properties Limited of Clarendon Square in the County of London, hereinafter called the lessors, of the one part, and Stephen Jackson of 25 Potter Street, London N16, hereinafter called the tenant, of the other part, witnesseth as follows. 1. In consideration of the rents hereinafter reserved, and of the covenants and agreements on the part of the tenant and conditions hereinafter contained, the lessors hereby demise unto the tenant all that flat or suite of rooms known as number 6 in the mansion or building, hereinafter called the said mansion, known as the Towers, Carlton Road, N16 in the County of London, all which flat is hereinafter called the demised premises, together with the right for the tenant and the servants, friends, and visitors of the tenant, in common with the lessors and the lessors' other tenants of the said mansion, and their servants, friends, and visitors, to use the entrances, courtyards, passages, staircases, and lifts, if any, of the said mansion, for the lawful purposes of ingress and egress to and from the demised premises, but subject to the stipulations, reservations, and covenants hereinafter and in the schedule hereto contained, to hold the demised premises unto the tenant for the term of 4 years from the 1st day of January 1971, paying therefore yearly during the said term the rent of £500 in advance, the first payment to be made on the signing hereof, and each subsequent payment to be made on the 1st day of January of each year of the duration of the lease. 2. The tenant hereby covenants with the lessors in manner following. 1. To pay the said rents on the days and in the manner aforesaid without any deductions. 2. To sweep as often as need or occasion shall require all chimneys where coal fires are used, and to clean at least once in every month all windows and fan lights belonging to the demised premises, and to cover with carpet or other suitable sound-resisting material all the floors of the demised premises. 3. Not to do or suffer to be done, or allow in or upon or with respect to the demised premises, any act or thing which may be or grow to the nuisance, annoyance, danger, or damage of the lessors, or of the other tenants or occupiers of the adjoining flats, or which may injure or tend to injure the character thereof as a place of private residence. 3. The lessors hereby covenant with the tenant in manner following. 1. That the tenant paying the rents hereby reserved and agreed to be paid, and performing and observing the several covenants by the tenant hereinbefore contained, and the stipulations contained in the schedule hereto, so far as the same are to be performed and observed by the tenant, shall and may peacefully hold and enjoy the demised premises during the said term, without any lawful disturbance or interruption by the lessors, or any person or persons claiming through, under, or in trust for them. 4. Provided always, and these presents are upon the express condition that if and whenever the said rents hereby reserved, or any part thereof respectively, shall be in arrear, and remaining unpaid for a period of 21 days after the same shall have become due, whether the same shall have been legally or formally demanded or not, or if there shall be any breach, non-observance, or non-performance of any of the covenants by the tenant hereinbefore contained, or of the stipulations in the schedule hereto, then and in any such case it shall be lawful for the lessors or any person or persons duly authorized by them on their behalf to re-enter upon the demised premises or any part thereof in the name of the whole, and thenceforth hold possession of such premises. In witness whereof the common seal of the lessors has been affixed hereunto, and the tenant has hereunto set his hand and seal the day and year first above written.
Part 2, Unit 10, The Language of Science. An extract from a chemistry textbook.
Nitrogen. Nitrogen was discovered by Rutherford and by Priestley, working independently in 1772. When free from moisture and carbon dioxide, air contains approximately 78% of nitrogen by volume. Most of the nitrogen used commercially is produced by the fractional distillation of liquid air. This commercial nitrogen is usually supplied with a guaranteed purity of 99.7%. The small amount of oxygen remaining may be removed by passing the gas through a tube containing copper turnings at bright red heat, or by washing in chromous chloride solution. Preparation from compounds. There are various ways of preparing nitrogen gas in the laboratory. In small quantities, extremely pure nitrogen may be evolved by thermal decomposition of sodium or barium azide in a vacuum. Usually it is prepared by the removal of hydrogen from ammonia or its compounds in one or other of the following ways. 1. Ammonia, or a mixture of ammonia and nitric oxide, is passed over cupric oxide at high temperature. 2. Ammonia is passed into a solution of bromine and caustic soda in water. The resultant oxidation of the ammonia releases nitrogen. 3. The decomposition by heat of a solution of ammonium nitrite or of a mixture of sodium nitrite and ammonium chloride yields nitrogen. 4. Ammonium dichromate decomposes violently on heating, giving off nitrogen and leaving a residue of chromic oxide. Pure nitrogen gas is colorless, odorless, and tasteless. It has slight solubility in water, has no action on litmus, and does not turn lime water milky. It does not support combustion or respiration, although it is non-poisonous. If nitrogen gas at a pressure of approximately 0.1 millimeters is subjected to an electric discharge, a yellowish-orange glow is emitted. The gas continues to give off a glow for several minutes after the discharge is switched off. It was suggested by Strutt that this active nitrogen, as it is called, consisted of the gas in its atomic state, and it has since been demonstrated experimentally that active nitrogen consists mainly of normal molecular nitrogen with an admixture of ground state atoms. The afterglow is a product of the emission band spectra of excited nitrogen molecules formed as the result of recombination of single atoms of nitrogen. Nitrogen compounds. Ammonia. Ammonia is a colorless gas, lighter than air, with a pungent smell. It is easily converted into its liquid state, either by refrigeration or by compression. The solubility of ammonia in water is greater than that of any other gas. 1,148 volumes of ammonia being dissolved by 1 volume of water at 0 degrees, and 739 volumes at 20 degrees. The solution is made by passing ammonia gas into cool distilled water. All the gas is liberated on boiling. The Haber process is now most usually used for the production of ammonia. In this process, the constituent elements, hydrogen and nitrogen, in the ratio of 3 volumes to 1.
Part 2, Unit 10, The Language of Science. An extract from a chemistry textbook.
Nitrogen. Nitrogen was discovered by Rutherford and by Priestley, working independently in 1772. When free from moisture and carbon dioxide, air contains approximately 78% of nitrogen by volume. Most of the nitrogen used commercially is produced by the fractional distillation of liquid air. This commercial nitrogen is usually supplied with a guaranteed purity of 99.7%. The small amount of oxygen remaining may be removed by passing the gas through a tube containing copper turnings at bright red heat, or by washing in chromous chloride solution. Preparation from compounds. There are various ways of preparing nitrogen gas in the laboratory. In small quantities, extremely pure nitrogen may be evolved by thermal decomposition of sodium or barium azide in a vacuum. Usually it is prepared by the removal of hydrogen from ammonia or its compounds in one or other of the following ways. 1. Ammonia, or a mixture of ammonia and nitric oxide, is passed over cupric oxide at high temperature. 2. Ammonia is passed into a solution of bromine and caustic soda in water. The resultant oxidation of the ammonia releases nitrogen. 3. The decomposition by heat of a solution of ammonium nitrite or of a mixture of sodium nitrite and ammonium chloride yields nitrogen. 4. Ammonium dichromate decomposes violently on heating, giving off nitrogen and leaving a residue of chromic oxide. Pure nitrogen gas is colorless, odorless, and tasteless. It has slight solubility in water, has no action on litmus, and does not turn lime water milky. It does not support combustion or respiration, although it is non-poisonous. If nitrogen gas at a pressure of approximately 0.1 millimeters is subjected to an electric discharge, a yellowish-orange glow is emitted. The gas continues to give off a glow for several minutes after the discharge is switched off. It was suggested by Strutt that this active nitrogen, as it is called, consisted of the gas in its atomic state, and it has since been demonstrated experimentally that active nitrogen consists mainly of normal molecular nitrogen with an admixture of ground state atoms. The afterglow is a product of the emission band spectra of excited nitrogen molecules formed as the result of recombination of single atoms of nitrogen. Nitrogen compounds. Ammonia. Ammonia is a colourless gas, lighter than air, with a pungent smell. It is easily converted into its liquid state, either by refrigeration or by compression. The solubility of ammonia in water is greater than that of any other gas. 1,148 volumes of ammonia being dissolved by 1 volume of water at 0 degrees, and 739 volumes at 20 degrees. The solution is made by passing ammonia gas into cool distilled water. All the gas is liberated on boiling. The Haber process is now most usually used for the production of ammonia. In this process, the constituent elements, hydrogen and nitrogen, in the ratio of 3 volumes to 1, are brought together at high temperature and pressure in the presence of a catalyst, generally pure iron mixed with molybdenum or potassium and aluminium oxides. Commercial ammonia prepared by the Haber process contains a small amount of water. This cannot be removed by the usual drying agents, such as sulfuric acid, calcium chloride, and phosphorus pentoxide, which all react with ammonia. Drying may be effected, however, by condensing the ammonia in a vessel containing metallic sodium. The sodium dissolves, forming a blue liquid, and reacts with any water present. The blue liquid may then be distilled to yield ammonia of a high degree of purity.
Part 3, Unit 1. The language of informal conversation. About a football commentary.
Did you go to the match on Saturday?
No. Listen to the commentary instead. It sounded pretty exciting, I must say.
You must be joking.
Why?
Well, it was pretty dull, really.
Was it? Come to think of it, that commentator, what's his name, Cooper or something, he does tend to overdo it a bit.
Well, if he made that match sound exciting, he certainly did overdo it.
How'd it go then? I should have thought the Gunners did well to win with the Wolves in their present form.
Yes, I suppose they did, but 2-1 didn't do them justice. They should have had at least 3 in the first half, and another 2 in the second.
Yes, he mentioned that there were some bad misses.
I'll say. You should have seen the one Johnson missed. He got hold of the ball out on the touchline, pushed it up to the outside right, and then ran into the middle for the cross. And when it came, it was a beauty. It dropped right in front of him, and all he had to do was to take his time and pick his spot. And instead, he took a wild swipe at it and skied it miles over the bar.
I know. He's a bit like that. If he could only calm down a bit in front of goal, he'd be twice the player. But at least he keeps on trying. How did Fellow shape at centre-half?
Very nice. He had a very nice game. Steady. Took care of the centre-forward and kept pushing lovely passes up the middle and out to the wings.
There was one thing I didn't quite get from the commentary. Why was Parsons booked in the second half?
Oh, well, it was silly, really. Their outside left had been giving him a bit of a rough time, hanging on to his shirt and that sort of thing, you know. And Parsons got fed up and hit him a bit too hard with one tackle. He went down like a ton of bricks and started appealing to the ref and all that. And so the ref comes rushing up and books poor old Parsons.
That's the 3rd time this season, isn't it? Or is it the 4th?
4th.
He's sure to get suspended this time.
Yes, I suppose he will. Pity, really, because he's not a rough player normally.
No. Good job they've got a replacement for him. Let's see, where are they in the table now? They must have gone up into 2nd place.
Yes, they're 2nd.
What chance do you think they've got of finishing top of the league?
Pretty good, I should think. You know, they've got a sound defence, and the forwards are starting to combine very nicely. They'll be in a very good position, if only they can manage to beat Leeds at home over Christmas, and then hold them to a draw when they play them away.
I suppose it all depends on how they shape after Christmas. You know how they tend to go off in the second half of the season. Remember what happened last year?
I'll say I do. I'm not likely to forget it. I've never seen such a shambles. To think they were in the top 3 for most of the time before Christmas, and then the way they came down when the rot set in. I just don't understand what came over them. It seems quite mystifying to me.
Well, I don't know. Can you really say that? Because they were quite okay until Blake got injured, and then without his influence in the attack, they just couldn't score goals anymore. You know, if you look at what happened in the first half of the season, Arsenal had scored more goals than any other club, or at least more than anybody except Leeds, and then, after Blake got hurt, the scoring rate dropped and they started getting beaten. They weren't big defeats, you know. Most of them were only by the odd goal. No, I think it was simply a matter of the attack being weakened.
Yes, there is something in what you say, but whatever the reason was, they certainly slumped.
They did too. Oh, well, let's not look on the black side. Perhaps they've learned their lesson. But I shall have to be off. When shall I see you?
Oh, on Saturday, I expect. I'll be there on Saturday, all being well, that is.
Where will you be? Usual place?
Yes, usual place, on the terraces.
OK, I'll see you then.
Yes, I expect so. And if by any chance I don't make it, I'll drop in and see you sometime later next week.
Right. Cheerio then, Alan.
Cheerio.
Part 3, Unit 2. The language of informal conversation. About a washing machine.
Hello, Betty. What brings you here?
Oh, hello, Jean. I came to look at one of those new twin tubs, like the one you've just had. What do you call it,
Washomatic.
Yes, washomatic. That's it, of course. I've got a head like a riddle these days. How are you getting on with it?
Oh, fine. It's made such a difference. You know I used to spend all Monday morning washing, but it's so much quicker now. I've actually got time to sit down and have a cup of coffee before I start the lunch.
I wish I could say the same. But does it wash as well as the old one? You always said how well the old one washed.
Yes, it really does. As a matter of fact, I think for some things it's even better. The heavier things. You know, like sheets. And I've even tried a blanket in it.
You didn't?
Yes.
Really, you are a glutton for punishment. I never forget the last time I tried to wash a blanket. It was so heavy when it was wet that I couldn't lift it out of the water, and I had to leave it until John came home. He was so annoyed, having to mess about with cold, soapy water instead of sitting straight down to his dinner. He gave me strict instructions never to wash a blanket again, so I always have them dry cleaned now.
Well, I must admit I had a bit of a struggle with this one, but once I got it in the spinner, it was all right. These things spin very fast, too. They get the clothes quite dry. Actually, quite a lot of them are practically ready for ironing, and they make the woolens nice and fluffy. The blanket was lovely, ever so fresh and soft.
Yes, it is better if you can wash them. Dry cleaning's never quite the same, is it?
No. I did have one little difficulty, though.
Did you?
Yes. It wasn't really my fault. At least I don't think it was my fault. I don't think the instructions are quite as clear as they should be, and...
Oh, dear, don't talk to me about instructions. I can never follow them, and the harder I try, the more stupid I seem to get. It's that funny language they use. I think it's meant to be hard to understand.
Well, yes. You know in the instructions that came with this washer, it tells you just about everything. But it doesn't remind you to keep the hose in the sink. You know, the hose that lets the water out. There's a sort of gadget thing, a clip. A retaining clip, I think they call it, and it's supposed to go over the edge of the sink. Well, of course, I went and forgot all about this, and the first time I rinsed some clothes and had to spin them, I'd left the hose dangling on the floor.
Oh, no!
I had, too. Well, you can guess what happened. There was water everywhere. Luckily, I'd only popped into the lounge, and I heard this splashing sound, and I said to myself, what on earth's that? And I dashed back into the kitchen and caught it before the whole lot was on the floor. But you should have seen the mess. The floor was swimming.
Oh, I say.
I didn't dare tell Jim when he came home. He'd have laughed his head off.
But your little disaster hasn't put you off.
Oh, no, I'm very pleased with it, really.
I'll have to get to work on John and see if I can get him to buy me one. My poor old washer's on its last legs. It leaks like a sieve, and it makes such a noise. You know, from the noise it makes, I think it's going to pack up at any moment. Does yours heat the water?
Oh, yes. At least it says so. But I fill it with hot water so I don't have to wait. They never have a very powerful heater in them, do they? I think this one's only 2 kilowatts.
Yes, I know. It will take me about a week to wash if I put cold water in mine and waited for it to get hot. What about the load?
Well, it's designed to take 7 pounds.
Is it? That's quite good, isn't it? Because some only take 6, don't they?
Yes, my last one only took 6.
And does it switch itself off?
Yes, it's got a timer. A sort of, lever thing. And you can set this for different washing times and just leave it.
It sounds very nice, and I really must see about getting one. But if I don't go now, the showroom will have closed, and I did want to have a look at one.
Well, why don't you come and have a look at mine? Well, you might as well. It's only as far to our place as it is to the showroom, and you can have a cup of tea as well.
Can I really? It's very kind of you. But are you sure you've got time? You'll be having to get the children's tea ready, won't you?
Oh, it won't do them any harm to wait 5 minutes. Do them good. Anyway, Sally's going straight from school to her music lesson, and David won't mind waiting.
Part 3, Unit 3. The language of informal conversation. About a lecture. What do you think of Potter's course?
Not much.
Why? What's wrong with it?
Oh, I don't know. It's just that well, because he overloads it with detail. He does tend to do this kind of thing, I think. That course he gave on town planning last year, it was just the same. Just a load of details which you could have got from a book anyway, and more technical terms. There was no overall...
No general overview, you mean?
Yes, I suppose you could call it that. I couldn't see the town for the buildings.
But you've got to have detail in this kind of subject, Jane. And anyway, I think he's good. You take his first lecture, for instance. I thought that was very interesting, and not at all over-detailed.
But that's just it, Helen. That's just what I'm getting at. He starts off all right and engages your interest so that you sit back and think, I'm going to enjoy this. I'm going to get a general idea of the important points in this topic. When bang! Before you know it, you're up to your neck in minute details and he's bombarding you with technical terminology and...
Oh, rubbish! Now you're exaggerating.
No, you two. Let's keep this on an impartial academic level. At least you both seem to agree that he starts off on the right foot with his nice, interesting introductions. Wouldn't you say that was important for any lecturer, Jane? To get the audience involved right at the beginning and then gradually increase the pressure?
Oh, yes, that's all right. I would expect that. I think anyone would agree about that. But the trouble with you two is...
Here we go again, Helen. She's going to put us all in our places again.
Oh, shut up, Brian. What I'm trying to say is you don't see my line of argument. I don't object to an interesting start to a lecture course, followed by a speeding up and more difficult material. What I'm on about is that Potter doesn't really raise the level at all after his introduction. He just piles on the detail. You know, when he got to the modern bit, I was so submerged in curtain walls, modules, mullions, cantilevered spans and reinforced concrete roof trusses, I didn't know whether I was coming or going.
Well, all right, perhaps he was just a bit disorganised towards the end, but I thought before that he was perfectly easy to follow. And although he didn't keep pushing his lecture plan under your nose, it was there all the same. What about the part where he dealt with the 18th century developments? I thought that was very interesting, the way he dealt with the Western developments. And especially the way Bloomsbury developed from the Bedford estates. You know, it began to make sense to me for the first time, because he made me see why there's such a feeling of order in that part of London, as compared with some of the others. And he brought all the threads together so well, and related the architecture to the ideas on town planning and the leasehold system and so on. I thought it was really good, sort of enlightening.
Yes, I like that part the best.
Wasn't bad, I suppose. Yes, on second thoughts, I'm inclined to agree with you about that part, but not as regards the rest. I shall stick to what I said. It was too detailed and too formless.
She has got something there, Helen, you know. Perhaps Potter finds it difficult to lecture to undergraduates. After all, he does do most of his teaching to the postgraduates. He only does the one undergraduate course each year, and I think he tends to forget where he is. He starts off being nice and general, and then tries to cram in a bit too much specialized information.
The main thing I object to is this lack of direction. I like to feel, well, it's a help to know you're getting somewhere.
Talking of getting somewhere, what about going for a coffee?
Yes, please. Where? The Union?
Oh, no, let's not go to the Union. It'll be so crowded at this time. What about the White Sheep? You know it, do you?
Yes, that place in Ferry Street, you mean, just past Barker's.
Yes, that's it. The coffee's pretty good there, and it's never too full in the mornings. That all right with you, Helen?
Yes, that's fine. But do you mind if I call in the library first? I've had this book out for ages, and they've been chasing me for it, so if I don't get a move on and take it back, I shall really be in the soup. If you like, I'll go the back way, and you two can go across the quad. If I don't catch you before you get to the White Sheep, I'll see you in there.
Okay, fine.
Bye, Helen.
Part 3, Unit 4. The language of informal conversation. About the directions for filling in a tax return.
Bumping into you like that was a bit of luck.
Oh?
Yes, I've been struggling with my tax return.
Tax return? Oh, I'm no good with tax returns.
No, I didn't want to... I don't want you to tell me how to fill it in. I'd like your advice. I bought a cottage last year, a holiday cottage.
Oh, that's nice. Where?
Tenby.
Tenby? That must have cost you a tidy packet.
Well, it didn't actually. You know, it was in a bad state and miles from the main road, so I got it for next to nothing.
You were lucky then, bad state or not. You can't get them for love or money these days. Not in places like Tenby, anyway.
Well, as a matter of fact, it wasn't just luck. I'd been on the lookout for one, and I happened to see that this one was coming up for auction. So I got in quick with an offer, and that was it.
We were lucky with ours. We bought it just before the prices started rocketing.
Yes, I knew you had one, and that's what I wanted to ask you. You see, I did this place up, and then I thought, well, I can't use it myself all the summer, so I might as well try letting it. And I advertised it, and I was amazed at the response I got.
Oh, you won't have any difficulty letting it in a place like Tenby.
You're dead right I won't. Do you know how many replies I had? 50.
Did you really?
Yes, 50 in the first fortnight. And in fact, I let it for most of the summer, apart from the holiday weeks when I was there myself. And now I've got to declare the income, and I wanted to ask you what you did about yours. Do you let yours? You do let it, don't you?
Oh, yes, it helps with the upkeep. Well, you just tell them how much rent you get and try to persuade them to knock off some expenses. That's all.
Yes, I know about that part, but what I'm not so clear about is what exactly I can put down as expenses, you see.
Well, I can't really remember.
I've claimed the rates, not that they're much.
Yes, and the water rate. Did you remember that?
Yes, and I've put down the insurance premium as well. But it says something about claiming the cost of structural maintenance, and I'm not sure what to do about that.
Well, if I remember rightly, you'd have to check about this to make certain. I think you can claim a proportion of all the costs of making it habitable in the first place.
Now, I wondered about that.
Yes, and that's likely to be the biggest item, of course. And then there's the decorating. You can claim for that.
Well, I did all that myself. So what do I do about labour charges?
Don't know. There's a leaflet about all this you can get from the tax office. But you can put down the cost of paint and paper and so on.
Yes.
And what else? Let's think. Oh, yes, I know. Management expenses.
Management expenses?
Yes, you know. Paper, stamps, phone calls. We even tried claiming mileage allowance for the car once, when we went down to do some clearing up after one lot we'd let it to. But I don't think the taxman was too happy about that.
Wasn't he? I'll watch it then.
And then there's depreciation. You are letting it furnished, aren't you?
Yes.
Well, then you can claim depreciation on the furniture and fittings.
Can you? That's worth knowing. But doesn't it take you about a month to work out how much all these things cost?
Well, it does take time in the first place, but it's all right once you've done it. We just keep a careful note of what we put down in the first return, and we tend just to copy it out word for word each year. About the only thing we need to alter is how much rent we've received, because that does change quite a lot from year to year.
Yes, I suppose it does.
Because you see, sometimes we let it for the best part of the summer, when we go abroad, that is, and at other times only for 2 or 3 weeks.
Well, I expect it will be the same with me. But I shall spend a fair amount of time there to begin with, in the next 2 or 3 years, that is. There's still a lot that needs doing. I've had the main part of the building made fairly sound, but there's an outhouse at the back that's rather rickety, and I've done next to nothing to the garden.
Well, if the garden's like ours, there isn't much you can do, except let it rip. The weeds grow at such a rate you'd have to be there 50% of the time to keep them down. We'd always buy a couple of sheep and turn them loose on it.
Oh, no. I don't think I fancy joining the farming community. I'll just have to face up to doing a bit of digging now and again, and with a bit of luck, the taxman will let me charge my labour to expenses.
Part 3, Unit 5. The language of informal telephone conversation. About a sermon.
(686-4243).
Hello, Carol? Is that you?
Oh, hello, Mary. Yes. I've been expecting a call from you. I thought you said you were going to ring last night.
Yes, I know, but I had so many things to do, what with the meeting and everything, that I just never got round to it.
That's all right. How are you, anyway?
Fine, thanks.
And Andrew?
Oh, he's fine, too. Very busy, though.
Aren't we all?
Yes, I know. It's terrible. I just never seem to have a moment to spare these days.
No.
Although I must admit that I did have a nice break on Sunday afternoon. Andrew and I drove out to Burford to see his aunt.
Where?
Burford. Well, you know, it's in the Cotswolds.
Yes, I didn't catch the name. This line's not very good, is it?
No, they seem to get worse each time they put the phone charges up. What are yours like? Ours were dreadful last time. Andrew was furious. I think he thinks I spend half my time on the phone chatting to friends. But as I told him, I don't go making trunk calls out of working hours about the firm's business and forgetting to charge it up to them.
No, I know. These men.
But I was telling you about the trip to Burford.
Oh, yes. It was a lovely afternoon, wasn't it?
It was. I haven't enjoyed a drive so much for ages. We went along the M4 to Reading, and then to Newbury, and from Newbury to Swindon, and then up through Lechlade to Burford.
That was a long way round.
Yes, I know. But we had plenty of time, you see. There was nothing to stop us getting away right after church.
Oh, I saw you there. That sermon.
Don't remind me. Well, anyway, we leapt into the car as soon as we came out of church and dashed off. And we didn't have to get back until late, so we thought we'd take the chance and see a bit of countryside for a change.
You lucky thing. It's ages since we drove anywhere for pleasure. It's either work or shopping or running someone to the tube when it's late and you'd rather not bother, and so on.
Well, this is what happens to us most of the time. And that's what made Sunday so nice. And we stopped for lunch on the way at that place just past Reading on the Bath Road.
Oh, I remember. Nice place. Bit twee, but the food's good, and at least it's got clean loos.
Yes. So we had a nice lunch there, and then carried on to Burford. Oh, she is a dear old thing, you know.
Oh, yes, Andrew's aunt. She must be getting on now. How old is she? I remember the last time I saw her, she was in her 70s, and that was at least 5 years ago.
She's over 80 now.
Is she really?
Yes, and she's still as sprightly as ever. You should have seen the way she dashed round and got tea for us when we got there. And she cooked most of the things herself, even baked the bread. I'd forgotten what homemade bread tasted like. And I'm afraid we made pigs of ourselves on our homemade jam and cakes. Well, we stayed there chatting until about 8, and then drove back. Got in, I think it was 11:30.
Well, that sounds very nice. Mind you, I expect you needed something like that to help you to get over that sermon. It was a bit of a bore, wasn't it?
A bit of a bore, I'll say it was. He did spin it out a bit, didn't he?
You can say that again. I don't wonder the congregation's falling off. Pity, really, because he's so good in other respects.
Yes, he's done wonders with that fund for the church hall extension. He was telling me it's up to £3,000, or will be by the end of the month after the returns from the next function. But as for his sermons...
They are deadly. But I suppose it's easy to complain.
Well, yes. But do you know what I'd do if I had to give one?
What?
Well, I'd write it in ordinary English to start with, and leave out all those pompous phrases, all that sacramental life and corporate worship and those absolute victories and things.
I suppose so. But in a lot of cases, they're expected of you. You have to say things like that, or nobody would know you were giving a sermon.
Perhaps you're right. But talking of sermons, I'd better ring off now before I start preaching to you. I'm sure you've got things to do. But listen, you're supposed to be coming to tea on Thursday, aren't you?
Yes, I'll be along about 3. That all right?
Yes, that's lovely. See you then. Bye, Carol.
Bye-bye. Give my love to Andrew.
I will. Bye.
Part 3, Unit 6. The language of informal telephone conversation. About an advertisement.
262-4344. Charles Farmer speaking.
Hello, Charles. It's Joan. Joan Cook.
Hello, Joan. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks. How are you?
Oh, not so bad, you know.
Good. I rang to ask if you know anything about hotels on the Costa Brava.
No, I'm afraid I can't be very much help to you there. Why?
Well, it's just that we've been thinking of taking the family to Spain this summer, and at this rather late stage we're trying to organise ourselves a suitable hotel. But I thought that you'd been to the Costa Brava.
I have, several times. But I've always taken a tent and done it the hard way.
Oh, I see. I didn't realise that.
Yes, great one for the open air, you know.
Oh, it must be nice, but we could never contemplate it with our lot. We're terribly disorganised as a family, you know, and we'd be in chaos in no time. And in any case, the car isn't big enough to get all of us in, and camping equipment as well. So we simply must find ourselves a nice hotel where they'll put up with noisy kids.
You have got a problem. And it's certainly a bit late. But there are masses of adverts. Have you looked at those?
Well, yes. As a matter of fact, I was reading one advert only this morning in the Sunday paper, which sounded marvellous.
For a hotel?
Yes, just outside Barcelona, and I thought to myself, I'll give Charles a ring. He's an expert on the Costa Brava. He may even know it.
Oh dear, I am a dead loss, aren't I? But tell me about the advert.
It said that this hotel was right on the beach, and that's essential as far as we're concerned, because the kids are really only interested in scrabbling in the sand and popping into the sea every 5 minutes, so we must be close to it. The closer the better.
I know just how it is.
And all the rooms have balconies facing the sea and overlooking the beach, so it should be possible for Mum and Dad to keep half an eye on the kids while they're playing, and manage a quiet snooze at the same time occasionally.
Sounds too good to be true. Expensive?
No, that was the remarkable thing about it. The prices were appreciably lower than in any of the other adverts I've seen, and yet the facilities were as good, or even better. You know, even allowing for a bit of exaggeration in the advert, it seemed to have a lot to offer.
Had it?
Yes, it's got its own swimming pool, and even if there's no need to use it very often, that means there are diving boards and water chutes and that kind of thing to amuse the children if they do happen to get tired of the beach.
Which is unlikely with yours, from the sound of it.
Well, yes, but you can never tell, can you? And the food's good, according to the advert again, but they're bound to say that.
Of course. The only way to find out for certain is to go and try it, and that's taking rather a risk. I tell you what, though, it's just occurred to me, Mr. and Mrs. Croft from over the road have been to that part of Spain several times, and I seem to remember them saying they always use the same hotel.
Do they?
Yes, at least I think that's what they said. I'll pop round later this evening, and if they do know anything that might be of use to you, I'll get one or the other of them to give you a ring.
Would you? That's very kind of you. They won't mind, will they?
No, of course not. I'm sure they'll be pleased to help.
Well, that's marvellous.
Did you say something about taking the car?
Yes. We've got a passage booked on the hovercraft. You see, we've done at least something to begin organising ourselves. And we plan to spend 3 or 4 days driving down through France. No need to rush, because Doug's got an extra week's holiday this year.
Lucky Doug. But isn't it rather a long drive, what with the children and the holiday traffic?
Well, strange as it may seem, the kids are very good in the car, and as we shall be driving quite a lot of the way on secondary roads, we should miss the worst of the traffic. But both Doug and I are very fond of pottering about in little French towns, looking at all those marvellous shops. In fact, I think we'd rather do that than sit on a beach. And if you go by train or air, you don't see much on the way. You're sort of insulated from all the lovely places you're passing.
Yes, I agree with you.
But I'm sure you must have better things to do than listen to me rattling on.
Oh, that's all right. It's nice to hear from you. But I will drop in on the Crofts and ask them to phone you. Don't expect to hear anything until after 9, though, because they're usually out on Sunday until sometime in the evening.
Well, I shall be around whatever time they ring, busy getting things ready for school tomorrow. And thanks again, Charles. It really is very kind of you to go to all this trouble.
No trouble at all. Only too glad to help if I can.
Well, thanks anyway. Bye-bye, Charles.
Bye for now, Joan.
Part 3, Unit 7. The language of informal telephone conversation. About a letter of application.
Peatley 271.
Hello, is that you?
Part 3, Unit 7. The language of informal telephone conversation. About a letter of application.
Peatley 271.
Hello, is that you, Joe?
Yes?
Bob here. How's things?
Oh, hello, Bob. Fine. How are you?
Okay, listen, I've decided to apply for that job I was telling you about, the one I saw in the Chronicle. You remember?
Yes, I remember. Croydon, wasn't it? What was it, a car factory?
No, light engineering. Rather like that place I was at in Leeds.
Oh, yes, of course. Light engineering. I remember now. And it was for a manager, wasn't it?
Yes, personnel manager.
Very nice, too. Do you feel optimistic about it?
Well, I wouldn't say I exactly feel optimistic, but at least my training and experience have put me in with a chance. So perhaps I could say I feel reasonably optimistic about getting shortlisted. But the interview, that's different.
Why, for goodness sake? You're not scared of interviews, are you?
No, I'm not scared of them, but I don't feel at my best in interviews. Not when I'm on the receiving end, that is. I suppose I spend so much of my time interviewing other people that I feel off balance when I'm in the hot seat myself.
Oh, I shouldn't worry too much about it if I were you. As you say, the job's absolutely made for you. I shouldn't think they'll get many applicants with your qualifications.
Well, we'll see.
Yes. You're bound to get an interview. What's the pay like, incidentally?
Oh, the pay is good. Nearly twice what I'm getting now. But then it is in London, and the rates tend to be a lot higher there anyway.
Yes, but even so, it'll make a big difference if you get it. You'll be loaded.
Well, I don't know about loaded. I should need a damn sight more than twice my present wages to be loaded.
Was the money the main reason for applying?
One of the reasons, probably not the main reason.
What was that, then?
Well, I don't know. It's just that I like working at Yorkshire Engineering, but I'd like more scope for putting a few ideas into practice. You know, old Billings is all right, and he's...
Who's Billings? Is he your boss?
Yes. He's the personnel manager, and he's very understanding and pleasant to work for and all that.
Yes?
And he'd never do anyone a bad turn, but...
He's a stick in the mud.
Well, no, not exactly. But he's very slow to respond to new ideas. He will accept changes, but it takes him so long to come round to a new idea that by the time he's trying it out, it's not new any longer.
And that doesn't suit you?
Well, it doesn't really bother me, but, I mean, you've got to move with the times these days, or you're soon left behind.
Too true.
So, anyway, I thought I'd have a bash.
Good for you. I hope you fed them all that guff about your qualifications and experience in your application.
Oh, yes, of course.
But you didn't lay it on too thick, did you? They can go off you if you make yourself sound too good, you know.
Well, I don't think I did. I just tried to be factual and emphasize the most important points.
I'll bet you'll cakewalk it. I'll keep my fingers crossed for you at any rate.
Thanks, I'll need it.
But what about the prospect of going south? Does that bother you at all?
Well, I know it's got its disadvantages. Housing's very expensive, and travelling in the rush hour can be a bit of a bind. But no doubt it's got its compensations, too. And if you want to get on, you've got to be prepared to move around, haven't you?
Well, that's true. But you've always lived in Yorkshire, and you'll find things very different in London. No more Sunday mornings on the moors.
Hey, steady on. I haven't got the job yet.
No, but if you do get it, you won't be able to pop out of the back door and run up a mountain.
True. That is something that I'd miss. That's one thing about these parts. You're never very far from some real country. Still, I suppose I could get used to country lanes in the home counties if I had to.
Ah, you don't call that walking, do you?
Well, no, not really. But you can't have everything, so I'd have to amuse myself in other ways. They do have a few more theatres and museums than we do, you know.
You'll get fat, middle-aged and civilized. What a fate. And the beer's lousy.
What do you mean, lousy? It's all the same these days, wherever you are.
Don't you believe it? Last time I was in London, I tried about 10 pubs before I could find one where the beer wasn't too cold. I think they put ice in it.
Well, if I get the job, I'll invite you down and we'll do a proper survey of the boozers.
You're on.
But I'll have to ring off now. I've got one or two things to do before I turn in.
Okay, but don't forget to let me know if you get an interview.
I will. Cheerio.
Cheerio, Bob. Thanks for ringing.
Part 3, Unit 8. The language of informal correspondence. A letter about a lease.
Dear Pete, thanks for the letter. It was nice to hear from you again and get all the news. That holiday of yours must have been marvelous. We keep thinking about fixing something up, and in fact Anne has been trying to persuade me to book up for Spain again, but I can't say I'm very keen. I'm all for staying in this country for a change. As it happens, we probably won't have all that much time for a holiday, though. We've just taken a lease on a flat, and it'll take us from when we move in, 6th of February, as far as I know at the moment, until the end of August to get the perishing place straight. You know what we're like. I must give you the address while I remember. It's Flat 6, The Towers, Carlton Road, N16. It's got a spare bedroom, incidentally, so we can put you and Margaret up when you come up to London. But I warn you that if you bring the kids, we'll have to shove them under the sink or in the airing cupboard or something. However, please give us time to move in before you descend upon us. Lord knows what we've let ourselves in for with this lease. I've just been reading through it, and what little bit I can understand seems pretty formidable. From what I can see, we've agreed to take more or less full responsibility for the place. and promised to behave ourselves in all kinds of ways. And about all the landlords have promised to do in return is to collect the rent from us at regular intervals. I suppose we can comfort ourselves with the knowledge that we're living in a mansion. At least, that's what the lease calls it, the said mansion, to be more precise. And our bit of it is called the demised premises. I must remember to look that up. Why can't these blessed lawyers write English? About the only comforting bit in the whole document was where it said something like, the tenant paying the rents, why not rent? And having behaved himself like the aforesaid good little boy, shall and may peacefully hold and enjoy the demised premises without any lawful disturbance or interruptions. That's nice, isn't it? Mind you, the windows have to be cleaned at least once a month. As I said to Anne, that will make a change, because our windows are lucky if they see a window leather every 6 months, let alone once a month. She was not amused, as they say. And it says the chimneys have to be swept regularly, which is a bit of a joke because all the fireplaces have been bricked up and electric fires fitted instead. Oh well, I expect we shall do most of the right things in the end. Joking apart, though, it really is quite a nice flat. It's got plenty of rooms, without being too big in the way that these older flats sometimes are. And the kitchen is very well fitted out. Anne was really taken with it after having to make do for so long with our present apology for a kitchen. It's also got a garage, quite a roomy one, and in view of this I think I shall probably go ahead and change the car. We've been talking about doing this for some time. But while I was having to park out in the road, there didn't seem much point in getting a new car and subjecting it to the weather and the tender mercies of the passers-by. But now I've taken it up with my local dealer, and it seems he will be prepared to give me quite a good trade-in price on the other one. But to come back to the flat. The grounds are nice too. Mostly lawns, with a few flower beds, and quite a lot of well-established trees and large hedges. It backs onto the local golf course as well. In fact, there's a gate opening right onto the course, so it will be dead handy if I ever decide to take up the old clubs again. Do you still play? I must say I haven't touched a golf club for at least 5 years now, but it would be nice to have a round again. We must see what we can do when you come to stay with us. I'll have to stop now because Anne has been on at me for about half an hour to take her down to the shops, and if I do that I shall be able to catch the post so that you'll get this tomorrow morning. Write again when you have a moment, and don't forget to let us know when you think you can come. With a bit of luck we should be more or less straight by the beginning of the summer, and it would be fine if we could fix something up around about then. Anne sends her regards to all of you, and please pass on mine to Margaret and the children. We'll expect to hear from you before very long. All the best for now. Yours, Steve.
Part 3, Unit 9. The language of informal correspondence. An exchange of letters about a travelogue.
Dear Arthur, it seems ages since I last wrote to you, so as I wasn't busy this evening, for once in my life, I decided to repair the omission. How are you? And how's the new job? At least, how's the job, because it's not all that new now, is it? I can't quite remember when it was that you started, but since it was sometime last autumn, you must have been at it for over 6 months. I wonder how you like being a sales manager. You really must write and tell me, but no doubt reorganizing that office has left you little enough time for writing chatty letters. Do you perceive the subtle dig? Good, I thought you would. I know it was really my turn to write, but you know how bad I am with correspondence, and I thought you might just take it into your head to drop me a line. However, I forgive you. No hard feelings, and I do hope that you're enjoying the work. I've been working pretty hard lately too, and I feel I've earned myself a bit of a break. As a matter of fact, one of the things I wanted to do in this letter was to ask your advice. I seem to remember that you knew quite a lot about Sussex. You worked there for a time, I believe. Well, I was thinking of going there for this holiday I've been wanting to take. I just wanted to go off in the car for 3 or 4 days and get away from it all by doing a bit of exploring off the beaten track. Villages, stately homes, castles, that sort of thing. I've never been to Sussex before, except once when I went down to Brighton on the train, and since this can only be a short holiday, I can't take more than 4 days off work. I shall have to spend it somewhere fairly close to London. So what I'd like you to do, if you have a moment to spare, is tell me what I can see in 3 or 4 days there. I did take a quick look in a book that I happened to pick up in the library. It was one of those Guide to the Southeast type of things, and that gave me some ideas, like going to see those villages along the edge of the South Downs, and visiting Petworth House and Bodiam and so on. But it wasn't sufficiently selective, really, in view of the short time I've got. So if you could list a few priorities that I ought not to miss, that would be very nice. Do hope you can manage it. I'd be eternally grateful, and do let me know how things are going. Hope to hear from you soon. Best wishes, Janet.
My dear Janet, how nice to hear from you. Yes, I did know how bad you were at writing, and I did think about writing to you several times. But as you guessed, I've been so snowed up with work for the last 6 months, I just didn't have the time. Anyway, I knew you'd understand. Things are beginning to ease up a little now, I'm glad to say, and I'm at last getting on top of this reorganization, but it was hectic while it lasted. Wish I could see my way clear to taking a holiday, but we're still not quite out of the wood yet, so I shall have to wait until the summer. But as far as your holiday is concerned, I think you would do very well to go to Sussex. What I'd do, if I wanted a nice restful holiday with a bit of scenery thrown in, would be to make for the southern part of the county. You could start off at, say, Bodiam, and take a look at the castle. It's a bit corny, really, rather like a toy castle, and you can't imagine it defending anything. I don't think it was ever in a real battle, but it's quite delightful. Then go on to Rye and Winchelsea, which are well worth seeing, and then drive west through Battle, where you could see the Abbey, and Hurstmonceux, another castle. This would take you on towards the South Downs for some walking, if the weather was suitable, and you could follow the line of the Downs and look at your villages until you got to Amberley and Arundel, more castles. Then, if you had time, Chichester for the cathedral, and back to London from there. That's about all you could comfortably manage in 4 days, and I imagine the last thing you want to do is rush. I do hope you make it. Sussex is so pleasant and has such a lot of variety. Don't forget to write and tell me all about it, and no excuses this time. Hope you are well, and that I shall hear from you after your holiday. All best wishes, Arthur.
Part 3, Unit 10. The language of informal correspondence. A letter about a broadcast talk. Dear Kate, it was lovely to get your nice long letter last week. So much news. You have been busy lately, haven't you? I wish I'd been doing so many exciting things. About the only interesting thing that's happened to me lately was going to the theatre to see The Visitor. So you see, I took your advice. I'd been thinking vaguely about going ever since you said how much you enjoyed it when you saw it in Bristol. So I kept an eye on the papers, and when I saw it was starting in the West End, I made the effort and went and booked myself a seat. As you know, when I go to the theatre, I usually make up my mind about the day before, and then it's too late to get a good seat, so I have to go to a matinee or first performance on Saturday. Then I usually end up in a bad seat where I can't see properly, or miles up in the gods where there's no room for my knees. So this time, I thought I'd organize myself for once in my life, and I got a very good seat, right in the middle of a row in the stalls. I certainly agree with you about the play. I enjoyed it very much. I can't say that it was the kind of play which kept me rooted to my seat, but it always seemed to be getting somewhere, even if there wasn't much action in the usual sense, and it was so easy to listen to. The dialogue was really very good, and I thought the characters were convincing too. They really came alive as far as I was concerned. As a matter of fact, there was a review of the play last Sunday on the radio. I wonder if you heard it. The reviewer said she didn't think the characters seemed like real people, only that they had a theatrical life of their own, or some such pompous phrase. However, they seemed real enough to me, and I thought all the actors were brilliant. The review said so too. At least it said that the 2 men were good, and that the actress who plays the wife, Joanna Burling, is brilliant. But I wouldn't like to single out any of them. They all seemed equally good to me. But to be fair, I think the review was reasonably level-headed and summed up the play quite well. Perhaps it was a bit fanciful when she started going on about the play having 2 levels of meaning and all that, but at least she stuck to what it was about and didn't get completely carried away by her own flights of critical fancy, like some of them do. But perhaps you didn't listen to it anyway. You're not much of a radio addict, as I remember. Incidentally, I was nearly late getting to the theatre. Ironic, isn't it? The first time I go to the trouble of getting myself a good seat for about 6 months, I end up having to rush in order to get there on time. The trouble was that when I left the flat, I forgot to check whether I had any change for the bus. The buses on our route are those where you have to put your money in the slot. And when I got to the stop, I looked in my purse and discovered I'd only got a £5 note. Well, these drivers are very good about giving change, but you can't very well ask them to change a £5 note, can you? So I just had to dash back home again and get some loose change, because there weren't any shops open at that time, and there was no way of changing it. To make matters worse, I could see a bus coming as I went charging away from the stop, so I knew I'd probably have to wait some time for the next. As it turned out, however, I didn't have to wait too long after I got back to the stop again, all hot and bothered, needless to say, and I'd just managed to sneak into my seat before the curtain went up. But in spite of the rush, it was a most enjoyable evening, and I'm very grateful to you for recommending it to me. I ran into Jenny Stone during the interval, incidentally. She was telling me that she and her husband are moving shortly into your part of the country, as it happens, to Exeter. He has a new job there, starting in September, so now they are house hunting. She was very pleased to hear that you were in the area, and said she would be getting in touch to ask you to go and see them as soon as they get settled in. I told her I would be writing, and she asked to be remembered to you. Well, I'm afraid that's all I have time for at the moment. I've got so many things to do I don't know where to start, so must say goodbye for now. Yours, Liz.